Hello, I'm Joshua Gottlieb-Miller. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm honored to read for Gulf Coast, which has been my home as a poetry editor and nonfiction editor on and off for the last decade. Thank you to the editors for making these readings happen and for all your hard work. I'm going to read from my manuscript, Dybbuk Americana. My work explores what it means for my son to inherit a Jewish identity I'm still learning. If you're following along on your screen while I'm reading, you'll probably see that these poems look funny. There's these boxes. There's not really a single valid way to read these poems. It'll just get a little bumpy. Shibboleths. It's like I was a coin and the world was a magnet, Owen says, after riding a bike for the first time. Sun's down to that magic height where the live oaks catch its blaze. We just get its shine. Then he's racing again, yelling at me not to chase him. He has my thick skull, laugh, eyelashes. My dad called me Tank. I call him Pinball. The world is a magnet I think about grinding my teeth when he was a baby. Still he careens, whistling along, speeds like air through God's lips. We shout for him to stop. Will he carry my hunger to please teachers and parents? My overthinking, craving, my inability to agonize. He's got my legs, his eyes. I know it's wrong to look for belief in a lock of hair. Any natural ease of faith I lack. Will my skepticism be his patrimony? Who am I to tell him who we are? Wonder rather than doubt is the root of all knowledge, but doubt is the root of all wonder. We are overtime, Owen yells. Writes infinite and perfect circles around us. Unalone. I wanted to read a trilogy of Texas poems. That last poem began on Rice's campus. This next one you might recognize from 59 heading away from UH a little over a year ago. Jewish Exorcism. The Jewish Jesus, a man in a tallit. I've got the billboard timed on our commute. I ask Owen if he wants his music, point away, towards the sunset over downtown. It nags at me each day. I don't want to be targeted for conversion. But what if the smiling billboard man is Jewish, like Buber, like Maimonides writing about Jesus? I know more Jesus than any sage we Jews read today. They're ancients whose teachings live on. Say 100 blessings a day, add a single letter to a single word of Torah, and you strive to be so good. Still I puzzle Jesus' Jewishness from rumor and lore, written decades after his death, canonized over Gnostic gospels centuries later, hardening the historical figure into a myth. I read Owen black and white Superman comic strips whenever he wants. He turns heavy pages in a hardbound tome. Superman ran faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. Man of Tomorrow, Man of Steel, Kal-El. Costume changes and reboots, endless planet-saving sequels of moody self-sacrifice. You remember that only 80 years ago, he could leap tall buildings in a single bound. But no more? Tremendous powers and limitations, a few issues later transformed into effortless flight. And then one day he's gone, the Jewish Jesus man, tallit and all. I had never realized before how billboards resemble single, frozen panels of comic books. At night, while Lauren puts Owen to sleep, I finally search his website. See, he lists his actions as crusades, murderous medieval rampages about which I have little to say except that at synagogue, when I'm told to circumcise the foreskin of my heart, I'll cry when this man is all I can think of. The cantor bows her head in song. What's in the want of deep religious feeling within me, lifting my voice to follow along? My great-grandmother could have landed here, at Galveston Beach. I'm puzzled most of all by my own insistence, as if my son won't only ever be himself. Looking at the gulf, he asks me, what's the point of a mountain you can't climb? Add a letter to a word in your mind. If not 100 blessings a day, say 10 blessings, 1 blessing. I want to be rebuked by a God who struggles with me. Keep shoveling, Owen insists, sand giving way to more sand. Lauren has been teaching Owen to not kill plants, ants, bluebonnets. Landscape is the friend to clarity, my rabbi prays, craves. They can't all be opinions. The winds and the waves, sun under stone. This is a weird place to put things in perspective because you can't get any distance from them. If not 100 blessings a day, say 10 blessings, 1 blessing. A pelican soars by, its stilled wings outstretched. We sit and look at the water. How clumsy silence is. I'll end with 2 more traditional poems. No boxes, and we're jumping around. And I hate that I'm doing the obligatory, these are the last 2 poems of the reading. But these are in fact the last 2 poems, and I look forward to hearing all the other readers reading as part of this reading. The Natural World. It turns out roadrunners are not blue, or perpetually hounded by coyotes. My childhood hypothesis that bees sting the flowers taunts me still. And echolocation, Owen tries to teach me, is not just a simile. It's so weird having a kid who still thinks the world is a great place, Lauren says. Einstein wrote of real difficulty in that physics is a kind of metaphysics. Physics describes reality. We don't know what reality is. We know it only by means of the physical description. Bedtime stories, euphemisms. As if gravity can be explained away. He's heard of Nazis, watched superheroes beat them up in cartoons, thinks jail is a game where kids lock their parents up, lie down and snore until the parents sneak back to their adult politics. When he told us the eye went missing at preschool, he meant a laminated shape he could barely recognize had been hidden. and he wants to find it so bad he'll learn how to spell. We can't escape the literal, so we try again. We tell him some people are judged by the color of their skin, his friends, their families. He's been learning cactus facts, how hawks perceive Earth's magnetic field. Honeybees flap their wings 230 times a second. Likely he'll forget we ever had this conversation. He nods, says he has lots of friends. He'll grow up in Houston thinking he's living in the future. For now, he absorbs every kind of dinosaur and how to grow a lemon tree. When a cloud is not an orange. When my father was a child, his mind looked like a filing cabinet. And though I'm a poet inclined to believe the world is a text we are writing, I often wonder what's happened to the hard drive of my mind when each morning I load slower and slower. In the book I had just read to Owen, he marveled at a tree animals used as a library. And now he's climbing a tree, picking oranges in the courtyard of the temple, where every year he learns his name has been inscribed in the book of life. I have been so disconnected from the natural world, I had never thought about oranges starting green. Most fruits start green, but not clouds. My son's mind takes on the many aspects of the cloud. He's telling me the clouds look like clouds when I ask him what they look like. Then he tells me respect means practicing good manners so God doesn't stay away. And I wonder if I missed something looking at the clouds, thinking oranges should taste orange, shouldn't they? Owen climbs higher to pick another green, orange. He has yet to be convinced that his senses can disagree with what he knows is true. I don't care if a book is a kind of simulation, more porous than I ever would have guessed. Orange, Owen says over and over, willing the green to shift before his eyes. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for watching. Before I get started, I'd like to give a quick but sincere thank you to Gulf Coast, and particularly to Emily Griffins for making the reading series possible this year in the face of truly unprecedented obstacles. So I'm going to be reading approximately the first third of a short story called Happiness and Abundance. It's the beginning, so I don't think it needs any further preamble. Happiness and Abundance. Despite the fact that Spooky Spaghetti was the next day, despite the fact that Mina knew it might be her only chance to get Devin back, she and Jacob stayed up all night drinking Vaderades, vodka mixed with Gatorade so that you wouldn't lose so many electrolytes or whatever, and playing Tekken 3 on the PlayStation Jacob had bought on eBay. After the vodka ran out, they moved on to boxed wine and really not that big key bumps of Coke, playing one more round and one more round until the sun came streaming through the broken blinds of Jacob's mildewed apartment, causing Mina to not only lose a match she should have won, Ling Xiaoyu versus Kuma, but also to think about her immediate future. She began sobbing that Spooky Spaghetti started in only 5 hours, and that she loved Devin so much, and that he seemed like he was probably maybe going to give her another chance, but that she was going to fuck it up because she always fucked everything up. And Jacob slugged her in the shoulder, told her to buck up, champ, and cut the rest of the condom packet-sized baggie into lines in the hopes that it would help them fake being functional adults and not the kind of 30-somethings that did this on a regular basis. And despite the fact that Devin disliked Jacob, Mina had told him that of course he should come with her to Spooky Spaghetti, that Devin and his daughter, Juliet, would love to see him. It was stupid, she knew, and she wouldn't have done it if the Coke hadn't been making her feel borderline omnipotent, probably, but sometimes she just needed Jacob around, especially since her mother's death 6 months earlier. Mina and Jacob entered Juliet's classroom and found Devin, his hands tied loosely behind his back with a shiny, expensive-looking woman's scarf, trying to capture a miniature donut hanging from a light fixture with fishing line using only his mouth. The donut revolved slowly, dripping powdered sugar onto his open lips, his outstretched tongue. The image, Mina thought, was kind of kinky, and she wondered if anyone else thought the game a little weird for a children's event. "What is he doing?" Jacob asked. Mina looked at the puff paint sign on the door. Dangling donuts. Dangling? Though neither Devin nor his ex-wife were religious, Juliet attended a Catholic school, not the kind with nuns, which Jacob found disappointing, for the education. And in Spooky Spaghetti, St. Thomas had combined a spaghetti dinner and Halloween into a fundraiser for a school that, Mina thought, didn't need any money. She'd observed kids receive king-size name-brand candy bars as they trick-or-treated down the high-ceilinged hallway, and the prize for dangling donuts was a $40 chai pie from a chic Indian fusion place down the street. She couldn't help but compare the whole thing to the fall festival at her own elementary school, the droopy, homemade affairs the cakewalk winners received, the frog toss, green bean bags with googly eyes in a bucket, the laps around the gym that constituted the spider sprint. Devin gripped the donut between his teeth and pulled, sprinkling white powder across the chest of his button-up. He nodded in Mina's direction and gave a half smile. A hopeful half smile? Mrs. Becker, Juliet's teacher, clapped and untied him before leaning in close and flicking her eyes at his daughter in a manner that was probably supposed to be subtle, but wasn't. The walls were adorned with religious paraphernalia as well as construction paper pumpkins and bats, and Mina was pulling Jacob off a glossy poster of Jesus' profile page on Faithbook. Mary Mother of God, Carrie Underwood, and Charles Darwin had all posted on his wall, when a warm body slammed into her hip and threw its arms around her waist. "Mina!" Juliet's grin held none of the hesitation of her father's, and Mina beamed back, though her smile grew more fragile as Devin approached. "Do you like my costume?" Juliet asked, stepping back and holding out the gingham skirt of her nightdress. Or was it gingham? Was all blue and white checkered material gingham, or just some of it? She had no idea who Juliet was supposed to be. "Mina," Devin said. No hi, no hello, no I made a huge mistake and I want you back more than anything, just her name. "I need to talk to Mrs. Becker for a minute. Would you mind taking Juliet to the haunted house?" Juliet curtsied to Mina, her red braids flopping over her shoulders. "No problem," Mina said, hitching her purse up her shoulder and trying to appear casual, though her heart was thumping against her chest like an excited rabbit, and her internal monologue had been reduced to yes, yes, yes. She'd been mistaken. Devin wasn't uncertain or cold. He was trusting her with his daughter. She imagined their reconciliation, the incredible sex that would follow, the 2 rescue beagles they would adopt. "Hello, Jacob," Devin said in a tone that asked what he was doing there. "Dev!" Jacob swooped in for a hug at the same time Devin extended his hand, and they ended up in an awkward elbow-to-chest bump. "Thanks, Mean. Let's meet in the cafeteria after," Devin said to her. He gave Juliet a squeeze on the shoulder and told her to be good before returning to Mrs. Becker. "Have you noticed how he always calls you Mean?" Jacob asked as they walked down the hallway, progressing backwards through the 7 sacraments in poster form. The ebullient minor piano chords of a Lizzo hit emanated from the cafeteria, and Juliet executed a pretty solid pirouette that turned into a downward shimmy, hands on hips, as she sang, "You tried to break my heart? Well, that breaks my heart," with a disconcertingly mature challenge in her voice. It reminded Mina of her mother, of her mortifyingly enthusiastic karaoke performance at Mina's 13th birthday party. Her mother, who is now dead because of a random, stupid car accident that hadn't even been anyone's fault. Jacob grabbed Mina's arm, probably harder than he meant to. "Are they playing Bad Bitch?" A blonde head swiveled toward them. "We're in a school. That's my point. It's edited, and it's not called," Mina dropped her voice to a whisper, "Bad Bitch. It should be. Anyway, it's like he can't be bothered with more than one syllable, and he named his daughter Juliet. Always a talker, on coke Jacob nattered on nonstop, like a caricature of a gossipy old woman. Mina tuned out and watched Juliet twirl down the hallway. Mina was a fuck-up. She knew that about herself, but she adored Devin's daughter. She hadn't realized how much until Devin had broken things off with her this last time, and she found herself thinking about playing pretty princess with Juliet almost as much as about him putting his hand gently around her throat and telling her to be a good girl as he twisted his fingers inside of her. Which it sounded creepy when she described it to Jacob later, but was incredibly hot at the time. But it wasn't just the sex that she missed, that she needed back, though it had been pretty great, Devin far more adventurous than his khaki suggested, or even Devin himself. His old man sense of humor, the unself-conscious gusto with which he sang Part of Your World from The Little Mermaid with Juliet in the car. It was the way she felt when she was with him, the near physical sense that she was somebody else, somebody better. When they reached the entrance to the haunted house, aka the gym, Mina handed 3 tickets to the parent manning the door, who was dressed as the Easter Bunny, a clown, a court jester. Was it some kind of mashup? She opened the door for Juliet, who curtsied again, and Jacob, who mimicked her. As it clanged shut behind them, latching loudly, almost all light vanished. She could just barely see the black velvet curtains that formed a narrow corridor guiding them further into the haunted house. A cloud that was probably supposed to be a bloody crimson, but was more of a mauve pink hovered around her waist. "It's dark," Juliet said in a voice on the edge of trembling. "It'll take our eyes a minute to adjust." "I got it," Jacob said, and he reached into his pocket and flicked on his lighter, a Zippo in the shape of a cowgirl with nipples that blinked red. In the flickering light, Mina could see his bloodshot eyes, the dollop of snot peeking out of his left nostril. "Shit, I'd better not look that bad," she thought. "Put that out." "She can't see," he said, pointing to Juliet in defense. "Now." He snapped it shut. "Can I look at it?" Juliet asked. Jacob started to hand her the lighter, but Mina slapped his hand away and jerked her head at his nose. "What?" She repeated the motion more forcefully. "What?" he asked again. "I can't understand you if you don't use your words." He leaned in close and put both hands on her shoulders. "Use your words." Underneath the peppermint of the gum he was chewing, she caught a whiff of bad wine. "You need a tissue." He wiped his nose on the sleeve of his jacket. "Gross, Jake." "Fine," he said in exasperation that seemed half feigned. "I'll go to the bathroom." Mina could hear his sneakers squeak on the gym floor as he walked away. Just before he hauled the door open, he flipped on the lighter again and stuck his tongue out at her. "What are those blinking lights?" Juliet asked. "They're nothing." Juliet took her hand and they stood there, in the black, sweaty palms pressed together, listening to the sounds of theatrical screaming, growling, and maniacal laughter coming from further on. "We don't have to do this if you don't want to," Mina told Juliet. "I want to." Mina hesitated, not sure if it was okay to ask about Carl, but Carl's absence or presence seemed like a crucial piece of information. A month ago, when Devin broke up with her for real, Carl had been a problem. Though Juliet was probably too old for a security blanket, and why she named it Carl? Between the divorce and the move and the new school and her mother's immediate remarriage to a karate instructor, she just needed one. Mina understood. Devin, his ex-wife, and even the karate instructor understood. St. Thomas, however, did not. In particular, the children of St. Thomas, who had taken to calling Juliet a whiny baby pants and once threw the blanket in the mud and jumped on it, did not. Juliet's teacher and the school's administration had, Mina felt, been inadequately sympathetic, suggesting therapy for Juliet rather than punishment for the Carl jumpers as a solution. After the last parent-teacher conference, worried about the potential collapse of her daughter's social life, Juliet's mother had reluctantly proposed a ceremonial cremation. Devin and his ex-wife had still been locked in a series of circular texts and phone calls on the issue when he ended things with Mina. "Do you have Carl with you?" "I have Pocket Carl." "Pocket Carl?" Pocket Carl, it turned out, was fucking brilliant. Rather than getting rid of the security blanket, Devin had multiplied it, cut it into pieces that resided in different locales. There was Dad's house Carl, Mom's house Carl, backpack Carl, bedtime Carl, car Carl, etc. Pocket Carl, the smallest but perhaps most important of the bunch, was safety pinned to the inside of one of Juliet's pockets every day before school. This would have delighted Mina under any circumstances, in any state of mind, but with the cocaine still vibrating through her system, she was smiling so hard that her throat constricted. Juliet took her hand again, and they began to walk, picking around the piles of fake bones littering the floor. Mina was already keyed up, so the anticipation of being scared, of knowing something was coming, but not when or from what direction, made her edgy. The velvet curtain seemed to billow ominously, and was that swirl of fog different from the rest, hiding something? She wished she had a Carl, and noticed that his fringe was sticking out of Juliet's pocket like dirty fingers. They turned the first corner, and like that, Mina would try to tell Devin later, we were hit in the face with all these strobe lights, and out of nowhere, this insanely fast dude dressed as a skeleton and holding a sword ran right at us. Mina stood frozen with fear, frozen for a moment, as the glowing skeleton moved inexorably toward her, the flashing blue-tinged light making it seem like he was skipping through time and space, the eyes of the skulls ever wider, ever blacker, the teeth turning into a sadistic grin, the sword glinting erratically. She swung Juliet into her arms and ran. Thank you.
Cast out, I move into the circle drawn in the center of the clearing. I build myself an open-air home. The panther and the hare's retreat from smoke lighting the screen of my black and white TV is a flagrant platitude. I knit in the taste of the smell of a decomposing frog. Nothing comes of it. In a past life, I smothered him under my foot, conducted a burial ceremony to exhaust myself because that's the only way I could sleep. My glass bust of Frankenstein's monster shattered when I forgot he was on the stove's red burner and turned on the high heat. I could see him taking his last green breath. I knelt down and kissed his shards. He cut my lips. I kissed a bloody, glittering circle of him around the stove's element, spat his remains into an urn, and placed a small note inside that said, "I'm sorry." In the clearing, I sat with my legs open, my back on the grass, warmed by his smallest shards floating in my bloodstream. All my flesh diseases reciprocated to sleep, and my body's selfish indifference cleansed the minerals inside me. I woke from a dream that ended with my face between the panther's legs, my skull between his sharp canines. The taste of conifer needles wrapped around my tongue. I huddled in the cool morning air, chest and knees, my tears running outside the circle, mixing with my shadow into a baby birthed with the hips of a smokestack. It walked away to do its dark bidding. From somewhere, an organ played me back to sleep. I woke to the sound of the village citadel collapsing, hazy, naked, and weak. Only the taste of star anise remained. I wear my hair long for company. I wear my hair long for company. With it, I savor the rain. I administer death rites for my pair of scissors. I glue leaves in my thick waves so my shadow becomes stranger and the stranger stays close to me. Migrant birds leave home in the winter because they have no one left to welcome them. Now I'm projecting. Now birds are projecting from my hair. I miss them in the warm smell of seeds and berries. I carve the beaks of my fallen friends into forks and knives, stack them neatly in a wooden box, and throw them off the side of a mountain wearing my swan dress. Sometimes I wish I could light them on fire and use them to trim my armpit hair to clear a smooth mound for tar and feathers, then trounce through the aviary squawking. I wear my hair long for comfort. I collect it into a pillow and lay down on a rock in a cold, wet cave. I can't fall asleep, so I style it for the revolution. A vast flock of birds march inside the cave's open mouth. We make a vid together for Snapchat, me and my prehistoric cadre, but I don't bother to look at it. I know my birds so well, I recognize them by the scent of their individual ambitions. The sounds of their popping crests beat out a call to arms in Morse code. Hear that soft patter? That's every bird I've met marching down the beachhead in a single file line to join us. Not a single one choked by a single plastic ring. There are galaxies in our black marble eyes. We march resplendent, radiant, to the bosom of the vast seas. Death at noontime. I felt my unctuous neighbors in Hades glowering at my wind-whipped cheeks gone red. I felt them lying underneath my feet in their beds, staring lazily into their crystal balls, uncting to each other, into their fungus-infused teas and deep tissue forgetting. Things were always dying and things were always living. And besides, the skin is an organ that is strong enough to sustain ecological change. I performed my afternoon ablutions with trash, imagining my neighbors were watching. Smashed coffee grounds and church wafers and empty husks of soybean pods exfoliate my face. I performed my ablutions in front of the mirror. Polka-dotted bathing suit sponge, sweet rot tomato paste seeping through my hair onto the loam I couldn't bear to upholster. I walked on my dirt floor with my dirty bare feet. My empty stomach rumbled and I couldn't do anything. I lay unproductive and was unproductive. I performed my after-nap ablutions with my tongue, thank you very much, on a stage wearing golden contacts like a soldier of Assadia, wearing a monk's stolen faith. Speculum or drone note, your choice of chisel. Take your pick of my bleached bones, then do whatever you want with them, playing this light-up game of operation. Wrap yourself in red curtains. Get sweaty, for the stage lights are beaming down like a motherfucker. No hay banda, no hay coro santo to walk me back from the deal I made with the 12 o'clock demons to scrape together a life living in this trash-heaped hut with windows facing the western wall of the waste plant. I've been watching my back for what feels like weeks since the sun cut the day in half. Death, if that is you, I can feel sneaking a pee under my mattress. Come gobble me up and shit a star before I'm bored and lost eternally inside this afternoon's fog of war. All the lightning bugs in the marsh were lighting a Morse code. Still, they couldn't rend the night into a different night. We grew that night in the strobe light step by buglet step. We learned to respect fractions for what they are blood worth, discarding the difference between the sum and the heat missive lost when the atom splits. I have a question for you. Who tucks love in the corner of a fleeting image? Only the night should be able to butcher the lining of your face without even taking an ounce of flesh. Hammurabi's code requires only intention. Even a cube made of jello could take your arm out of spite if it's blessed with a certain flavor of vengeful magic. Somewhere, a satellite is broadcasting the heart's rhythm. The dew-coated rocks sweat to it. Somewhere, the rusted face of an android is continuously rained on in a belched-on thicket that no one has access to. Flowers are blooming through its eye socket. Is that scene safe, like a knife at a garden party? Is that scene where this glinting is really guiding us? No, that's a satellite beeping from the exosphere. The future marches to it in an unpredictable rhythm. The future throws out its back. Strange realities spume from that galactic icy hot. My gut follows that Congo line to a different heartbeat while my body transforms toward a toad's slickness. A stone's smoothness overcomes me, and the smell of my body dissected becomes me, or disperses me like a scented candle, the smell of the tiger by William Blake. My organ smells, thickened from the sun's warmth, bring a dusk of vultures shining vaguely of leftover sunlight, refracted in the vapor clouds of their communal jewel. The moon asks me what I learned about faith, while the horse smothered my toad body on the soft dirt by the red ventricles of the mango trees. Foxtail, I pray that you broadcast the lightning bug's glinting rhythm on your tip so I can understand oblivion's sarcastic winking. Foxtail, plant my limbs in a crime scene and leave the detectives no clues. Someone tattoo me a lily pad in the daytime to give me the bravery to be found out in one dramatic act so I can sing proudly to you from the decomposing pages of the books in the soul's wobbly library built on a foundation of tinfoil wrappers and dead leaves. I looked inside my body's cabinets and found the business end of a bucket of mop water rigged to fall when I pulled the door open. I have to keep looking, lightning bugs. I know I was the one who stowed you in a basement so deep inside I can no longer find the door, but I can't do this alone. Project your knowledge in flashes from that dirty glass window, dots and dashes onto the highest corner of any wall you can reach. I'll watch for the flickering light from a tree house I found erected on the body of the oldest oak in the marsh. Line by line, we can dismantle the syntax and translate the slop blotches soaked into my pages so I can find the key. I'm only sorry it's taken this long to really try. Help me now so I can find you and unlock the door, and we can sneak out of the kitchen of my feeble castle before the wet pages of this book close for good and the walls swallow us all.
Liftoff, 2219. The island had lifted off one wet afternoon exactly 200 years ago. To mark the occasion, this year's parade would take place in a brand new venue, an open-air stadium constructed at the land's end. The stadium was in the fall zone, a fenced 1 kilometer strip at the very edge of the island, typically off limits to the general public. 1,200 children had been mobilized for mass dance events, top musical talent booked at great expense. 30 tons of fireworks lay dormant in the cases that lined the sheer rock walls which delineated land from empty space. Warrant Officer Tay was one of the 200 parachutists who collectively made up that year's surprise opening. As the final guests were being seated, he waited in a plane nearly 5,000 meters above sea level. That was to say, 4,000 meters above the island. After the first set of mass dancers, all 200 of them clad in red and white wingsuits would simultaneously fling themselves out of individual planes, coming to land in perfect formation on the platforms that lined the topmost bleachers of the stadium. As the most experienced parachuter on the squad, Warrant Officer Tay's landing would be the trickiest. The platform he'd been assigned was on the wall of the stadium that was right on the island's edge. Should he miss, he would plummet another 1,000 meters beneath the island into the roiling, hostile sea. 2019. The day the island lifted off had been utterly ordinary except for the torrential rain. The monsoon had come earlier than usual that year, not by days or weeks, but by nearly 6 months. It was the June holidays, so people were especially grumpy about the unseasonable weather. A letter appeared in the national newspaper beseeching the government to move the biannual school holiday period to March, given the new weather patterns did not allow them to make full use of their children's time off. No zoos or botanical gardens could be visited in the ongoing downpour. The children would miss out on important enrichment lessons, usually conducted during their vacation time. The Ministry of Education had responded politely, pointing out that now the monsoon period appeared to have shifted forward, the December holidays would no longer suffer from rain, and parents could carry out their planned activities then. The ministry was wrong, of course, for the monsoon hadn't shifted, only intensified and elongated indefinitely. But they didn't know it then. No meteorological models predicted the break in history. No climate change experts sounded the alarm. To this day, dedicated conspiracy theorists still meet regularly to craft elaborate stories about the liftoff. It was aliens, it was divine intervention, it was the government. No doubt the government had considered taking credit for the improbable event. Ultimately, it had been decided against, out of fear that the countries which remain untethered to the earth, besieged by rising seas and violent endless rains, would ask them to share their non-existent expertise. The subsequent diplomatic fallout could have been catastrophic. It was better to cultivate relations with the countries that had lifted off, rather than to lie to the ones that hadn't. 2219. A screen in Warrant Officer Tay's aircraft beamed in the celebrations from down below. The general public was still being seated. Relaxing into his chair, he went over descent procedures in his mind once again. He'd done it 572 times before, but this jump was different. Though the plan that would change his life forever had only emerged a few months before, it now felt as if every jump he'd done before had been leading up to this moment. And what exactly was he going to do today? Jump out of a plane 5,000 meters above sea level? Yes. Fall freely through space on a cushion of air, wind filling his ears, his lungs struggling to expand? Drop to an altitude of 2,000, then deploy the parachute strapped to his back. Feel the familiar hard tug on his chest and groin, always like being pulled back into the universe after entering an alternate one. Feel the quiet surround him. Look down at the world beneath, the island he so loved, a mere patch of earth hovering above the clouds. On a rare, clear day, they only had 5 each year now, he would see the glimmering sea another 1,000 meters below. From that vantage point, the island looked as if it was floating in the sea once again, like the pictures in the history books before the liftoff, before they entered their great perfect isolation in the clouds. Warrant Officer Tay had hoped today would be one of those unexpectedly fine days. But the air beneath the island was thick with steely clouds, the clouds obscuring everything below. Occasionally, when the wind shifted a certain way, a gap would open, and a different grey would be revealed, a grey of rain and sea and storm. From time to time, one of the clouds would light up, striking electric current down at the sea below. (2019) As for the liftoff itself, reports of a rumbling beneath people's feet began coming in just past 7 o'clock, as families sat around dinner tables spooning vegetables onto children's plates, remarking on a sudden popular actress's new haircut, agreeing that the powers that be had really gone too far with the latest GST rise. The rumbling was quiet at first, felt rather than heard, but what started out as a gentle vibration, as if the ground was a table atop of which someone's phone was buzzing insistently, grew quickly into an unmistakable roar. Earthquake, most assumed. Get in the bomb shelters. Did bomb shelters protect against earthquakes? No one knew, for the island was not one that was accustomed to disaster, one of its prevailing myths being its simultaneous vulnerability and invulnerability. The former referred to foreign invaders, internal strife, trade wars, the latter to natural disasters. For the island had always been protected from tsunamis, the region's biggest threat, by the larger countries that surrounded it. No volcanoes marked its flat surface, and it was on neither a hurricane belt nor a fault line. The point being, most people jumped into their bomb shelters, hoping they would prove to be good surrogates for earthquake shelters, most being unaware that no such thing existed. From the insides of those small metal-walled rooms, no larger than an average bathroom, the rumbling felt even louder. Mothers hugged their children, fathers placed their palms against the ground and declared the shaking was dying down, even though it was absolutely not. 2,219. To conduct an unplanned dive off the edge of the island was one thing, one illegal and almost certainly life-threatening thing. But to dive into an electrified cloud was another. No, Warrant Officer Tay did not want to die, contrary to what his plans might suggest. What did he want? It was hard to explain. He jumped from plane to island 572 times before, and what he felt was not quite boredom. No, one never tired of that feeling of being reduced to weightlessness, but rather a splinter of need that with each jump sunk deeper and deeper into the foundation of what he believed about himself. For Warrant Officer Tay was not a man prone to need. Ever since his wife had died, their son 10, their daughter 3, he'd lived a life of strict regularity and abstinence. He ruled his small household with a firm and distant hand, raising the children to be successful professionals in their own fields, his son a computer technician, his daughter a postdoctoral student in applied mathematics, and well-adjusted, contributing members of society. But even as he ferried them from school to home, as he supervised homework and cooked nutritious meals of steamed fish and stir-fried vegetables, he'd always had at the back of his mind a sense of incompletion. Each jump he did, be it practice or performance, felt unfinished. Even as his feet landed on firm ground, his parachute folded gracefully to the earth, he was always aware that solidity was an illusion, that beneath the grass, or cement, or dirt, lay 1,000 meters of pure, empty space. And beneath that, who knew? It was said that the ocean had swallowed all the land that hadn't lifted off, that all but the areas with highest elevation, the Kinabalu area, some parts of central Java, were now submerged after 200 years of torrential rain. His children were grown up now, married with children in flats of their own, and his days had attained an ascetic perfection. Wake, work, sleep, repeat. He would be made to retire next year, and the emptiness of the time that threatened to stretch on beyond that filled Warrant Officer Tay with terror. The lure of empty space beneath the island grew stronger, so when 6 months ago he'd heard the bicentennial parade was to take place in a brand new stadium at the island's edge, he volunteered to take the most difficult landing, the platform right at the edge of the stadium, and began to plan. Now the results of those months of planning lay in the unauthorized pack beside him in the plane now, which he would strap over his parachute harness when the time came. The pack contained a portable water purification system, a first aid kit, nutritional supplies, and an inflatable dinghy. 2019. Oral reports of how long the rumbling lasted varied drastically, ranging from 30 minutes to 5 hours. What people were in agreement about, however, was the loud crack that followed the rumbling. It was later found that the alarming noise marked the point at which the island detached from its roots in the earth entirely. The upward motion was imperceptible at first, marked only by a vague sense of heaviness. Then people found it was growing more difficult to lift their arms from their sides. The fathers who were standing felt compelled to sit down. As the island gained acceleration, it seemed as though the bomb shelters had been transformed into elevators, and when it became unmistakable that the island was rising, many began to shriek, to press their hands into the floor if they were indoors, or fling themselves to the earth as if they were outdoors, as if to force the island back down through the collective weight of their bodies. Still, it continued to rise. 2,219. Music began to play. Warrant Officer Tay glanced at the screen. The VIPs had arrived. He opened the plane door. Having done it so many times before, he didn't usually notice the noise the wind made anymore, but this time he was consumed by its roar. As he conducted one last safety check, tugging on tabs and lightly touching buckles, he noted that his hands were damp with sweat. Finally, he pulled on the unauthorized backpack containing the inflatable dinghy. The crowds were cheering 4,000 meters below. He jumped. 2019. After the initial acceleration, it was said that the world seemed to go still. Most stayed in their bomb shelters or on the ground. We have, however, the memorable report of one 82-year-old woman who had taken a seat in the park she'd found herself in when the liftoff began, her umbrella still open above her head. "I am 82 years old," she thought. "My life has been long and full, and should this be the end, then the end it will be." Through the rumbling, there she remained, on that bench, examining the backs of her poor spotted hands that had once been sheathed in smooth, tight skin. When the crack occurred, she merely looked up at the thundering sky and noted that the leaves on the broad rain trees above her head were trembling rather violently. Only at liftoff did a look of mild surprise cross her face. She placed one hand on the back of the park bench, but did not grip it. And when the island began to rise, the surprise left her ruined features and was replaced by wonder. What we most remember from the interview the 82-year-old woman later gave was this: "After the initial acceleration was over, you didn't feel like you were rising at all. She thought it had ended, that they'd come to a stop. She stayed on that bench, her eyes wide and nerves humming. But when she moved her umbrella aside and looked up again, vertigo struck, and she squeezed her eyes shut. For the rest of her life, she had another healthy 18 years ahead of her. She would never forget the sight of the clouds rushing towards her, the sudden slam of cold as she was engulfed by them, the blinding light that came after. It was like falling into the sun," she said, "except you lived to see the other side." Thank you.